For more, I'm joined by Michael Steele, former RNC chair and host of the new podcast, Man of Steel. Ron Reagan, author and political commentator. Aisha Moody Mills, Democratic strategist. And Phil Rucker, White House bureau chief for the Washington Post. I want to start with Phil on this, on the general question of this issue of the N-word, if we will. It sounds, well, that's the way we say it because we don't like the word. Historically, we have no reason to like it. What do you make of that non-defense by Sarah Huckabee today? Well, she didn't deny blankly that he had never used it because she may be wary, like everybody apparently at the White House was. According to the tapes, there was people worried about that, including some people who don't like Omarosa, said, wait a minute, there's tapes of them worried about this tape.
So she struggled to defend President Trump generally against charges of racism, but specifically on that N-word tape, it was striking that she could not at the podium at the White House say to the American people that the president is not on tape. There's not a recording of him using the N-word. She, of course, said she hadn't heard the N-word, but under that sharp questioning from Kristen Welker, who was great there, she just could not give that guarantee, which makes you wonder what's out there, what kind of tapes could be there.
Ron Reagan, we've got this guy, Penn Jillette, part of the Penn and Teller team from Vegas. We know that act. He's a bright guy, of course. He said, I was in the room. I would say racially insensitive things. I heard them. I say racially insensitive lines that made me uncomfortable. That was him talking there. So their witnesses are starting to peek out from under the covers here. This isn't something the White House is ready to defend in a blank form. And someone say, oh, yeah, he never said it.
Well, yeah, I have to say that this is one of those instances where Omarosa is telling us things that we already more or less assumed. I mean, is any of us actually surprised that Donald Trump would deploy the N-word in various contexts? I'm not. But I have to admit, if there's a tape and you actually hear him saying that, that's liable to have some impact there. And I'm sure he doesn't want that to come out.
Well, the White House briefing today was dominated. I mean, question after question. I think there's two questions on other subjects today by questions about Omarosa and President Trump's response to her allegations. Let's watch today. It is the #1 news story today. Whatever you think of it, it's up there because of what this. Watch this happening today.
Is this any way for a president to talk about any American, let alone somebody that he hired?
The president is certainly voicing his frustration.
Why didn't he hire somebody? He's describing as a dog.
Why does he just ignore it?
It's part of a pattern of insulting prominent African Americans.
This has absolutely nothing to do with race.
You asked the president if he's ever used the N-word.
I didn't have to because he addressed it to the American people.
Can you stand at the podium and guarantee the American people?
I can't guarantee anything, but I can tell you that the president addressed this question directly.
Just to be clear, you can't guarantee it.
If you look at the actions that this president has taken, certainly the policies that he's enacted, you can see the heart of who he is.
You would like the president to stop tweeting about Omarosa?
The administration, in some cases, will be forced to respond.
Aisha, let's get your thoughts in here. You're the only woman I notice on the panel right now, so take some time here. The dog word. The use of that word in this context, in this heat right now, of this argument, what does it tell you about the president's character?
Well, let's be clear about what he was trying to say. He couldn't tweet out the B word, which is really what he wanted to say, was to call her a female dog, so he just called her a dog. I'm troubled with the fact that, you know, we're trying to have a dignified conversation about the fact that there is a vile and bigoted person in the White House who is the president of the United States. We knew what his character was when he was running for office. We knew what his character was right before the presidential election when the tapes came out, where he talked about, you know, his stature as a celebrity and how he could grab women any kind of way he wanted to. We knew what his character was decades ago when he put an ad in the New York Times to put innocent black boys in jail for a crime that they did not commit, and they let him sit for years.
Yeah, and
so we
innocent.
know who this guy is, and now Omarosa just happens to have some facts to corroborate that.
Well, let me go to this whole thing, both of it. First of all, the dog thing. I think it's derogatory, especially toward women. I think it has a history there. This is not something I grew up. I heard it. Right. You know, it was heard. Right. It's always derogatory. It has to do with everything awful. It is terrible. The president, I keep going back to this. When a president speaks, he's not just the head of the executive branch. He's not just chief executive. He's not just commander in chief. He's head of state.
Yeah.
He speaks for our country.
All of us.
He sits in Lincoln's chair.
Right.
And he talks for the country, and he calls a member of our society, a fellow citizen, a dog because he disagrees with what she's been saying. That's unusual. I'm speaking politely. That's unusual for any president I can remember going back. I don't remember anybody past Ike, but, but I do read the history books. Dog is not in the lexicon.
It's unusual in a public sense. Now, what presidents may have said privately, that's a whole different ballgame. But you're absolutely right. It is unusual in the sense that this president has no filter. He tweeted it. He tweeted it. He has no filter with regard to this. Look,
what's he trying to say? What's he trying to get done? He's a politician. What does he want to get done by calling someone a canine, a dog?
It's his way. It goes to the first point that yes, he wanted to use the B word, but probably.
You think?
Oh, absolutely.
You think he's more angry? I think he's more afraid of her.
Of course, that's what he wanted to say.
Aisha, that's your opinion. But
that's exactly what he wanted to say.
I think he's afraid of her. I don't think he's angry. I think he's afraid of her.
I don't think he has. I don't think he's afraid of her in the sense that you would traditionally, because he created her. But I think in this sense, he wanted to use that word but couldn't, so he fell back on dog.
Let's go back to how he used her.
Pattern.
He used her to vouch for him among African Americans and liberals generally to show his diversity and his sensitivity to the need for diversity.
And to defend him against charges of racism and sexism during the campaign. She's one of the people that he would put out on camera to defend him and say he's not racist, he's not sexist. The irony is now these are the charges that she's leveling against him. But the dog thing, that goes back to a long history of authoritarian leaders using animalistic slurs to try to dehumanize people or groups of people, and it's in keeping with the pattern through history.
And guys, as the black liberal on the panel, I just wanted to add, Sarah Huckabee Sanders said, oh, well, look at his record. Look at what this president's done. I want to be clear that black people didn't buy the hype from Omarosa when he was pimping her out before to try to come to the community and say, oh, look at what he can do for black people. And certainly he has not had any policies that have demonstrated a commitment to the community. So just by her own, conversation today, we can show that the president is not down with black people. And that is its own policy issue, right? But this calling people out of their name, whether it be a woman, whether it be a person of color, whether it be immigrants, is just problematic for the president of the United States. And we got to just focus on that.
Well, I thought I think he's been siding with what he thinks is going to be a tribal election in 2020 already. I think he's been sizing this up, faking a fight with LeBron James, who everybody respects. Everybody rooted for him. He was the underdog in that race for the NBA. He was the guy out there all alone. People cared about that guy as a human being. And to pick a fight with him, I thought told me a lot about his politics. Anyway, as I said, calling Omarosa a dog is part of a long pattern of dehumanizing comments by President Trump. Let's watch.
You've called women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals. Your Twitter account...
Only Rosie O'Donnell.
For the record, it was well beyond Rosie O'Donnell.
Yes, I'm sure it was. I think the big problem this country has is being politically correct.
And she starts asking me all sorts of ridiculous questions. And, you could see there was blood coming out of her eyes, blood coming out of her wherever.
So you have Beauty, and then you have Rosie, the Beast. You have Beauty and the Beast.
And, what was that? Is that a dog? Uh-oh. It's Hillary. Only in New Hampshire. That was first it was the squeaky dog, then it was a very serious dog, right?
Ronald Reagan, about this, I really do think, and I think this is a nonpartisan assessment. I think the presidency does. I was just reading this book that's coming out about LBJ, and at the moment Kennedy was killed, those around him who don't necessarily liked LBJ saw something in him where he grew. And he became, for all those months ahead when he got the Civil Rights Bill through and the Voting Rights Act through, he grew into someone he wasn't before. The presidency drew something out of him that was good and proud. This president doesn't seem to be affected by his election, by the Electoral College. He doesn't seem to have said, wait a minute, now I can't say dog anymore. I can't make these street corner comments I used to make when I was a tycoon. Talk about it.
You asked a few minutes ago whether any other president, any president that we could remember, would ever say anything like this about a fellow American citizen, and the answer, of course, is no, not publicly. But if the last 2 years have taught us anything, it's that Donald Trump does not appreciate or grasp the grandeur and the dignity of the office he holds. And you're quite right that when people come to that office, if they're good people, they grow into it to the extent that they can. Trump has had the opposite effect. He is not growing into the dignity and the grandeur of the office. He is dragging that dignity and that grandeur through the gutter, because that's who he is. There is no larger self there that he is going to assume now that he has taken office. This is what we get. Aisha was correct at the beginning. We should have known this all along, and many of us did. What do you think you're going to get when you install in the Oval Office an imbecilic sociopath? Things are not going to turn out well.
Well, maybe where we're headed. But Aisha, thank you so much. I just want to remind everybody about somebody I disagree with on almost everything, Ronald Reagan Sr., the president. And I have to say something about him. He wouldn't walk. This is about head of state, not about policy, left, center, right, or anything. He wouldn't walk into the Oval Office without his suit coat on. It was that serious. And I like that. The older I get, the more I like a little formality, a little class in our president. Thank you, Michael Steele. Thank you, Ron Reagan, Aisha Moody Mills. Thank you for joining us. You're a newcomer here. Please come back.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.